your day-to-day lives, some of the things that you may wonder about or be dealing with, or just may not have thought about. And this will give you an opportunity to maybe think about it a little bit and see if it's something that you need to be aware of or something you need to look at. My name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a CPA, an ex-banker, and have spent time in the financial arena for most of my adult life, and have had an opportunity to work in a lot of areas where economics and finance make a difference. And so it's been a learning experience for me, and I'm just trying to share some of that with you, some of the things that I see, some of the things that I've seen happen, and some of the warning signs or some of the issues that might be on the horizon. You're welcome to call in if you've got a comment, 220-9788, 220-WSTU. It is a community service program. It's to, just get some information out there. I am by no means the expert on any of these things. There are a lot of people out there that have a lot of knowledge in this area. So anytime you want to share. The one thing I'm amazed about here on the Treasure Coast is that, and especially in Martin County, that we have an awful lot of people who have in their other lives have been in the financial arena, the economic arena, and have and do have an impact on the financial industry. So I'm going to talk a little bit today. Again, we've been discussing over a period of time now some of the concerns that I have about inflation and where it's going, and I think I've been saying now for a number of months that we were going to be looking at some relatively significant inflation numbers. And I know it's in my industry, it's always good to hedge. You say stuff like, well, it could, and on the one hand, but I tend to be a one-armed economist when it comes to this kind of stuff. I'll take a position on it. Last thing you want to hear from somebody is, well, on the one hand, it could be this, and on the other hand, it could be this. So I'm the one-armed economist. I'm going to tell you what I think I see happening, and I could be wrong, and it's going to be on record, so that's okay too. But it's I've been looking. We've been looking and talking about this for some time, and consumer price index is going to come out today, and I know a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to things that are happening, with some of the financial numbers, but it's relatively significant in a number of things. One, consumer price index has over the years, over the last few years, maybe 10 or 15, been less of an indicator of inflation than it used to be. The consumer price index used to be a pretty good indication of where inflation was in the economy. But over the last 40 years, probably, we have become primarily a service industry, and the consumer price index is made up largely of products. It's and so the first thing that you can say is that in any review of potential inflation, uh, the number that makes a bigger difference is ultimately going to be wages, labor in a service industry, because that's the major cost, and it's the major cost of the ultimate service that's provided is the labor. So the so when we start looking at the consumer price index, we have to recognize that there are certain things in there that are not weighted as heavily as maybe our economy would now justify. So uh, that's one thing to take a look at. There's other things that we don't realize. For example, uh, as an economist friend of mine, Merle Dimbath, was mentioning this morning, that housing and construction, we know the costs of housing and construction have gone through the roof lately, but they're not going to be reflected in that consumer price index. Um, it's not something that's necessarily going to show up there because it's an asset. It's something that is based on value, not based on a product sale. They don't consider that a product. They consider it more like an investment, more like an asset. So that's not going to be reflected in the numbers. The most recent fuel increases because of the pipeline problems is not going to be reflected in there. Now, a lot of people, we saw some. I love this, the double talk, and you can, we don't have a shortage of fuel right now. We don't have a shortage of gas, frankly. We don't have a shortage of oil. We have a supply chain problem. So, well, that supply chain problem caused a shortage, which is going to cause a price adjustment. When the quantity goes down and the demand remains constant, price will go up. Doesn't have to increase demand. When you have a commodity, a product like oil, if it can be a price can be affected in multiple ways. One, the demand for it can go up. So, for example, gasoline prices typically increase about this time of the year because of summer vacation. So, and because of that, there's an increased demand for oil and gas at this time of the year. So we always see a little bit of a bump up in price. Why? Greater demand. All right. Now, what we've got right now, regardless of what you call it, is a reduction in supply. We've had a couple pipelines that basically are out of play, um, and and have not been and are not being utilized. Uh, One of those being the pipeline from Pennsylvania to upstate New York. That and into New York, that hasn't been fully operational because of some problems. So, and then we of course had this pipeline that was coming down that was going up basically from the refineries in Texas up to the Northeast, and that we had the hacking issue that took it offline. Supposedly that is going to be fixed, but what has now happened, and so it's something to be aware of because it's going to affect us here and all over the United States. And in fact, Florida is impacted by this pipeline to some degree. But so what's happening? What's happening in response to the problem with the pipeline is that not only do we have a reduced supply, which is probably going to be temporary, but we've now created an increased demand because people are now going to the gas stations to fill up, and they are filling up. They're not, they're not waiting. They're not doing a couple dollars. I'm going to do $5 till payday. I'm going to do $10 till payday. They're not doing that. They're filling their tank. So that increased demand, that front ending of all of that demand, is going to have an effect on price in the gas industry, in the gasoline industry in particular, for a while here, because people around the country see that and they start thinking there's going to be a long-term shortage. They also start filling up, and then we've got trips coming up and all of those kind of things that demand's going to increase naturally this time of the year anyway. So we are going to see a further increase in gas prices. There's no question about that, and we're going to probably be living with that for a few months. So gas and fuel is a significant part of American income. If your fuel costs go up, we all know that, first of all, most people, and again, said before, it's a service industry, largely service industry. Many people have to have some sort of transportation to get to work. And we have the days where we live on a farm and we sell out of our farm and we don't travel much other than on the farm is long gone. So we have to get to work. I don't care whether we Uber, whether we walk. Well, walk makes a difference, but most of us can't walk. So I don't care whether we Uber. I don't care whether we take a car, we take public transportation. Those all, in general, involve fuel, and so we're going to see an increase in those costs. When that increases for the for the labor pool, we have to have a raise to be able to afford to pay those costs. Otherwise, we've just taken a decrease in pay. So if, for example, my pay is raised as a result of the minimum wage to $15 or something that they're talking about, but it costs me much more to get to work, to buy products, to feed my family, and to do all of those kind of things, I might come out net to the negative. I come out where it costs me more. And again, that's why it doesn't pay to focus on gross price in many cases. In a lot of things, whether it's business sales or whatever it is, it's after tax dollars that make a difference, and that's true with anything. Is that you got to look at your after tax dollars, and so if I make less, if I get my take home pay for my job and that's higher, but all of my other costs are also higher, my net disposable income, the amount that I actually have left over, uh, will go down. Not only will it go down, it could go negative. In other words, it could be that I have no disposable income, and that I'm actually borrowing or needing to borrow. It's interesting though. Credit card debt is going down. Personal credit card debt is being paid down kind of at historic rates. It's getting paid down a lot quicker. Now, I can ask you, and you can say, and how is consumer debt being paid down? Well, you and I know that probably the main way it's being paid down is people are refinancing their houses, or they've sold their houses, or they've done something with their houses with low interest rates. Basically, what they've done is push that cost out over 30 years. It was their chance. Interest rates increased. I mean, interest rates are staying down. Housing prices increased. All of a sudden you pull some money out of there, you can pay some credit cards down. Some people had used those credit cards to make home improvements, and now they're getting permanent financing and paying it down. Some of them used it to buy cars. Some of them used it to buy whatever they spent it, went on vacation, did whatever. And now they're using the equity in their homes to to pay those off. Is that a good decision? Probably not, because you're basically paying back disposable income that you didn't have. You're paying back short-term expenditures with long-term debt. Financially, that may make sense. I mean, it definitely, if I was managing this business of a household and I can replace short-term debt with long-term low interest rate debt, it makes sense for me to do that. As a business, I would do that. When we look at it as a consumer, it doesn't make sense for us to consistently refinance short-term assets or disposable assets with long-term debt, unless we're going to potentially pay that long-term debt off when we get rid of those disposable assets. So what I'm getting at is, if I use my house as collateral for a loan, go out and refinance my house, and I take 20 grand or 30 grand out of my house, and I turn around and borrow against my house on a 30-year loan at 3%, so that I don't have to take out a car loan of $30,000 at maybe 4 or 5%, that has to, more importantly, be paid off over 7 years, maybe 6, 7, 8 years. That financially may make sense, because my payments are going to be less, and it may make sense to be able to do that. I've got much longer time to pay back my debt. But the asset that I bought with that, the investment that I made, is gone. So if that investment is gone in 5 years or 8 years or 10 years even, I can guarantee you that in 30 years, that investment is probably not going to be worth anything. So I'm going to have a large period of time where I still have debt, that I'm burdened with debt, and I have no asset that I can legitimately get rid of to pay that debt down. That asset has already been fully utilized. It no longer has value. It probably is broken. It had to be repaired, and I've probably replaced it a couple times over with repairs, and most likely had to trade it and get something else. So that's an important thing to recognize, that even though that may in the short run make financial sense, in the long run, that's not good utilization of debt, because you're going to end up with debt and no assets. And potentially you're going to end up with multiple debt and for the same asset. If I did that, uh, 3 times over a 30-year period of time, without paying down that debt, I just continued to borrow, and every time I needed a new car, I did it again. It wouldn't be prudent, because now I've got all this debt and no way to, no way to pay it off. It's the same thing that, frankly, that business owners are looking at now with some of these loans, particularly these loans that don't get paid back. The EIDL loan, for example, it's a great loan, 3.75% for 30 years. For a business to have long-term financing like that is a really, really good alternative. But at the same time, you've got to recognize that if that borrowing exceeds the value of your business, you've actually sold off a portion of your business. And so therefore, you have to be cognizant of the fact that it may take a long time, uh, i.e., you got to pay that debt off. It may take a long time to get that asset back or you've got to grow, you've got to double your business size with that. You've got to turn around and double your business size to make that money worthwhile. Otherwise, you've got this long-term debt, and you've gotten the cash, you've spent the cash on whatever. So you've in effect taken the equity out of your company. That's what borrowing is about. It's about taking the equity out of something normally. Whether it's your own personal borrowing equity, your ability to borrow money, whether it's the equity of your house, the equity of your business, the equity of your car, any of those things, you're extracting that and and taking the cash. And what you spend that money on makes a big difference. So if I turn around and spend that money on vacations, and I spend it on disposable items, things that don't last for more than a year, that's probably not a prudent investment. And we all know that. We don't go out and borrow money on we don't go out and try to borrow 10-year money, 5-year money, uh, and take a vacation. We don't do that, because we know that we're going to have to still pay that debt off, and we're going to be in debt. Now, will we put a vacation on a credit card? Yes, knowing that we're going to pay that credit card off when we get back. It's just convenient. It's a temporary surge. So we may say, okay, I've got some money for this vacation. I'm going to pay it off over the next 6 months or whatever. This is this year's vacation, so I'm going to pay it off with this year's money. As long as you've done that, that's fine. As long as you don't have a significant investment, as long as you've gotten out of debt very quickly, it's not a problem. But that's not what's happening, and that's not what's happening with the EIDL loans. It's not what's happening on the consumer side, and it's not what's happening on the government side. When the government talks about we're investing in infrastructure, well, they're not. Most of this stuff the stimulus money out there is just that. It's stimulus. It's designed to be spent. For business, it's designed to be spent on working capital items. Working capital means things that happen every single day, things that you spend every day. It's not for buying other businesses or for buying equipment or whatever. It's not for that purpose. It's the fact it's supposed to be. You can't buy out a partner with it. You can't. It's not for any of the legitimate business things that you would use long-term money for. It is for short-term. It is for payroll and for rent and for utilities and for supplies and for all of those things that you're spending every single month. It's supposed to be that, and it's supposed to give you enough money to cover that, the EIDL loan, to cover that for 2 years, which is a long period of time. 2 years worth of business expenses is what. But now what's going to happen? You spend that on business expenses for the next 2 years, and you've still got 30 years, 28 years more of debt. So, you're going to have a payment going for 28 years to pay for those 2 years. That's a fairly significant thing. So unless you've spent your money wisely to the point, and what I mean by that is not just surviving, but unless you've spent your money wisely to the point that you've created more value than you've spent, that in the period of time you double the value of your business, then this isn't the right thing to do. It doesn't make sense to do that. Now, having said all of that, I'm going to put the other arm on, and I'm going to tell you what, from a business standpoint, from a financial standpoint, where the economy is, everything that's happening right now, everything the consumer is doing right now makes sense. And that's what I always like about economics and about, a free market system to some degree, to the extent we have some of it, but that I like about that, and that is that the market always is right. And as much as the talking heads look at the individual and say, "Oh, that's stupid. You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't. It doesn't make sense to borrow money." Just like I said, it doesn't make sense to borrow money long term to spend on overnight and disposable items. And yes, that does not make sense. I mean, from a practical standpoint, that does not make sense. I tell you where it does make sense. It does make sense if the value of that debt. Now we're talking about not the asset side. Remember, I said if you borrow this money long term, you better be able to double the value of your business or to get that money back, because you're spending that equity. That is true. And that is what normally would happen. That'd be normally what your situation would be. But now we're going to talk about the other side. And here's where the consumer is really smart. And and they are reacting, I think, very, very logically and financially very astutely. So when does it make sense to borrow money and spend it on? When does it make sense to borrow money long term at a low interest rate, fixed rate? When does it make sense to borrow that money and then spend it on everyday stuff? Well, I'll tell you when it makes sense. It makes sense when that everyday stuff is potentially increasing by 50 to 100% on an annual basis, because that means that your dollar is cheaper. In other words, inflation is going to push your debt down in value. So I think if you remember a few shows back, we talked about how does debt work? How is it priced? Well, it's priced. Debt is bonds. Bonds on the public exchanges are the equivalent of debt. That's what they are. That's companies or the government borrowing money. Well, what do we know about bonds? Well, bonds, we know if interest rates go up, the price of bonds, the value of bonds go down. So the cost of bonds go down. So if interest rates go up, the cost of a debt goes down. So if I have long-term debt and general interest rates are going up pretty considerably, the cost of my debt is going down an equivalent amount. So if I've borrowed long-term money on a fixed rate basis, I've gotten that money a lot cheaper now than it was or than it should have been, or than it would be now. So for example, right now, if I gave you a choice and there's $100,000, you can borrow, let's say you can borrow $250,000 and the current mortgage rate for $250,000 is, let's say, is 12%. And I have a 30-year mortgage that you can take over, and that 30-year mortgage is is priced at 3%. So now I've got a 3% 30-year mortgage. You're looking at a 12% 30-year mortgage. Same $250,000. Are you going to be willing to pay me more than $250,000 if you can assume my debt to pay it? Well, yeah, sure. It's a way cheaper. I'm saving tons of money because my debt has value to me. It saves me money. And that's what's happening. Frankly, the people are a lot smarter than the government and than the economists on this. People are looking at this and they're not understanding it. Well, the basic understanding is this. I have short-term debt. I think there's going to be inflation and the interest rates are going to go up. I don't know that my jobs and my salary is going to keep up with that. So therefore, I'm going to pull the equity out of my house now and get a fixed rate loan, or I'm going to pull the equity out of my business right now and get a fixed rate loan. And then I'm going to pay that fixed rate loan off with inflated dollars. So the value of that fixed rate, I think that the cost of it, I should say, is going to go down as interest rates go up. It's going to reduce my cost because I'm going to be able to pay it off cheaper than paying off debt at 12%. That's pretty basic understanding of what happens in an inflationary environment. You're encouraged to borrow fixed rate in an inflationary environment, not be it's not debt free. You'd think it would be better to liquidate debt in an inflationary environment because you don't have the costs. Not necessarily, because if you're in an highly inflationary environment, if you've got commodity prices going up very, very rapidly, bread, eggs, meat, all those things, if they're going up very rapidly, then it makes sense for you to buy them now and pay them off later when you've gotten an inflated salary. So, and that's what typically happens in high inflation. So, if inflation doubles between 8 o'clock and between 9 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm going to want to be paid, and I'm going to want to be paid twice what I was working for, because now it costs me twice to buy what I need to buy. So, and if I don't, I might as well just leave because I can't afford to buy the stuff anyway. So then I have to hope the government gives it to me. That's the whole idea behind an inflationary environment in a communistic or socialistic system, is that prices are rising so fast or being controlled arbitrarily such that the only way that I can survive is the government has to give me money on a regular basis to help pay for the cost of that inflation. Inflation is a tax. Don't miss that at all. It is a tax. It is just a tax that's levied on the poor and on the working poor. It is the worst kind of tax because it makes 0 sense, because it's requiring those who can least afford it to pay. And yet it's hidden. It's buried in just the opposite language. So when somebody says we're going to tax the corporations, we're going to tax the wealthy, what they are actually saying, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute, but what they're actually saying, what the words that are actually coming out of their mouth, there should be there should be the typing underneath their speech giving you the real words, because they are speaking a language that's a lie, and it should be defined underneath what they're actually saying. Just like they were speaking French and you needed it interpreted, so it should be interpreted. So every time you hear a politician say, we're only going to tax the wealthy and we're only going to tax the corporations so they can pay their fair share, what you should hear is, we're going to inflate the heck out of the poor so that they can't survive and they will be dependent upon us. And you say, well, that's baloney. That's political. That is not political. That is purely economics. Now, the politicians don't want to deal with the economics, so they bring in economists who will lie for them, who will tell them things like, we've got inflation under control. We're the Fed. We're the Treasury. We've got inflation under control. We'll keep inflation under control. There is no inflation. Don't look behind the curtain. Don't look behind the curtain. Oz is back there. So I'm just telling you, that's what's happening. We have politicians ignoring economics, and what they're doing instead is bringing in economists who will buy into their lie, who will promote their lie, who will try to find a reason why smoke and mirrors, people behind the curtain, why what they're saying is really true. And it's not true. Basic economics is this: costs, and taxes are a cost. Costs are never borne by the corporation. They can't afford to bear costs because they lose the investors. And they will tell you, oh, not all the investors will go and yada, yada. It's not true. Ultimately, as it spins out, maybe in the short run, there are exaggerations or things happen in the short run that are not as obvious. But in the long run, a year, 2 years, 3 years, the bottom line is that will continue to the point that what happens is costs are passed on. They're either passed on in the form of inflation, which is how most corporations do it. They pass it on in the form of inflation. And so that inflation is what you hit, you as a poor person, you as a working person, you as middle class. That's what you're going to pay, is inflation. You're going to pay that tax because it's going to be pushed directly into price increases. Now, can you not? Is there some cases where it won't be pushed into price increases? Yes, it can be pushed into sometimes labor reductions. How? By reductions in by mechanization. So if you can mechanize something to eliminate labor, you might be able to shift the costs into something that is cheaper than labor. And at that point, yes. Does that do you any good? Not if I'm working. So I either get inflation and I can't afford to buy the stuff because I'm not taking home enough money, or I get fired and I can't afford to buy the stuff because I don't have any money. To me, neither one of those make any sense. Neither one of those are economically feasible in the long run, because you aren't around if you can't feed yourself or if you don't have any money to feed yourself. So that's what they're saying to you when they say to you, we're going to just make the wealthy pay. That doesn't happen. The wealthy don't pay. That's not how it works. Corporations don't pay. They pass the cost along. It's very simple. It's very basic economics. I almost never hear anybody talk about it. And you'll not hear this administration talk about it because they need to cover it up. It has to be something that they bury because they don't want to come out and say, by the way, you guys that are barely getting by, suck it up because you're not going to get by at all going forward. We're going to suck every dollar out of you. The cost of meals are going through the roof. Bread, milk, food going through the roof. And oh yeah, and maybe a Tesla will go through the roof, but you don't care about that because you won't be able to afford a car. So, bottom line is that's what's going to happen. That's what is happening right now in the economy. But people are smart. They're seeing some of this coming, and they're doing things, maybe not intentionally, but they're doing things that make sense. They're paying down that short-term debt and putting on long-term fixed rate debt in the form of their mortgage on their house. And that in an inflationary environment is going to be a good thing. Now, if you're in a depression, if we were looking at a collapse of the economy, then that would not be a smart move. And that's why I think what we're seeing is a final determination by the people of what they think is going to happen with the economy. And frankly, that's all that matters, because the economy is what they do. So if what they think is followed up by what they do, we will get what they think. So that is the bottom line in an economy like ours. So if the consumer sees inflation and is reacting to that, we will get inflation, because they will start buying things in anticipation of increases, which will then automatically force those increases, because the demand for those items will go above the supply, which will then produce a higher interest rate. And so that's what we're seeing already happening in the economy. And the consumer had to decide, and has been trying to decide for a while, maybe not consciously, maybe unconsciously, but the consumer's been trying to decide, should I try to save my way out of this next economic issue, or should I try to spend my way out of this by putting debt on and pulling out some of my equity? And so a lot of times people think they're saving when they're pulling their equity out, but they're not. The equity is the savings. When they pull the equity out, they spend it. Now, if they spend it on home improvements, for example, that may produce your equity back, but you may have equity in something that's not going to appreciate, or you may. It just depends. But you've now got debt on this situation. So if prices were to go down, you've now got to pay that debt off with more expensive dollars, because now we've had deflation, not inflation. So that's kind of where, that's kind of what is happening. And I think it's hard sometimes because there are a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of things that go on, and sometimes those things don't make sense. They give conflicting signals. And so it takes time for the market to flesh out. But I do truly believe that the people are starting to be worried. They're starting to see what's happening, and they're starting to go down the path of inflation. And the interesting thing is that some of the older people in this country that lived through the 70s, and that lived through, and were working during the 70s, they remember the Jimmy Carter eras. They remember the inflation that happened during that period of time. They remember mortgage rates of 12%. Tell a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old that the mortgage rates are going to go to 30%. I guarantee after they stop laughing at you that they're going to go to 12%. I guarantee after they stop laughing at you that they will say that is impossible. That's never going to happen. And all you have to do is say, Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter. Do you know Jimmy Carter? That's all you have to say, because it is very, very possible. And it did happen, and it will repeat itself, because history repeats itself, because we are stupid. We don't learn from our history. Some of us choose to ignore history, don't even want to look at it. And so as a result, we repeat it so that we remember it. That's why some of the things that we get in history, some of the lessons that our forefathers and foremothers learned, some of the things that happened to them, it's good for us to know that and recognize it, because I guarantee you, if we don't, it happens again. And the further we get away from that, and the less we remember what happened, the less we remember the Jimmy Carter era, the less we will appreciate what it could happen, and the more likely we are to make it happen again. So, but anyway, I think that's what's happening. And I think that's what's happening in the economy right now. There's going to be some politicians that are going to tell you that when the CPI doesn't go up 12, 15, 18%, that see, there is no inflation. And you will say back to them, that's a bogus number. Give me the increases in service costs. Let me see the increase in fuel. Let's see the increase in corn prices and commodity prices. Let me see the increases in my labor costs and all of those types of things. I mean, in industries like the medical industry, nurses are being paid bonuses to go to work. You don't think that's not inflation? That's money being paid. Sometimes as much as a third to a half of their salary is being paid for them to go to work at a specific location. When they're paying signing bonuses, restaurants are now paying signing bonuses to get people to work on on weekends and to work on Fridays and Saturdays. Some restaurants are closing just because they can't find employees, not because they don't have the customers. They're open. They can't find the employees, and they can't find the skilled employees, people who know what they're doing, because now they got to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on training. So those labor costs are rapidly going up. You think it's going to be easy to bring somebody in at $10 an hour that they used to make? No way. Nobody's going to come back to work for more than 14 or 15 bucks an hour because they've heard that's what I should get paid. So we've now created a base rate of $15 an hour. That doesn't exist most places yet. So that's going to force all other prices up, because if I can go get an entry job for $15 an hour and the job that I get paid for 5 years worth of experience is $12 an hour, I'm going to quit and go back and take the entry job. Right? So now I'm not doing that right now. Right now, I'm going to stay at home and collect unemployment. And that's why the unemployment number, that's why labor numbers are so confusing right now. We are sitting at such a dichotomy in the labor market. We now have a situation where there are millions of jobs unfilled and millions of people unemployed. Doesn't make sense. There is no economic reason for that other than something has stepped in the middle of the labor negotiation, the labor balance that you get in a free enterprise system. And labor is a free enterprise system. There are tons of people out there typically, and there are tons of people needing jobs, and there are tons of jobs out there typically. And so what happens is the wage for that job becomes the fair price. It may not be in your mind a fair price, but it is the fair price for that job. It's equilibrium. It's when you have a large number of buyers, and that's the labor portion of it, and a large number of sellers, that's the people that have jobs. When you have that pool, the price under all free market systems, if left to their own, the price that you get will be equilibrium, which would be a fair price. That's the definition of fair price in economics, is the equilibrium price. And that's what we would have right now, if not for one thing. The government has stepped in as another supplier of jobs. And you say, what do you mean? The government's offering? No, the government is saying, I will give you $375 a week if you take my job and sit home. My job is unemployment. So if you choose to be unemployed, I'm going to pay you $325 a week plus whatever the states are going to pay you. And most states still are paying something, especially the states up north. So you've got states up there that are paying $250, $300, $350 a week in unemployment benefits, and they've extended those benefits indefinitely. And that's coupled with $375 a week from the federal government. So they're making $750 a week. So that's roughly just under $40,000 a year for sitting home and doing nothing. And $10,000 of that, or $12,000 of that, is not taxable income. You don't have to pay tax on it. So it's tax-free. So that's the equivalent of about another 20 or 30% when you consider Social Security and everything else. It's equivalent of another 20, 30%. So effectively, people are making over $50,000 base, no matter what you did, your base is over $50,000 a year for doing zero. The government is offering you that job. As long as they continue to offer that unemployment, and as long as they continue to offer those benefits, and the states continue to offer those benefits, they are competing with the free market. They are competing with the businesses for the labor pool. And frankly, business is losing. How do you compete with that? Because their jobs don't justify they don't justify $25 an hour. $50,000 a year is $25 an hour. So if I was paying 10, let's say I was paying 12, let's say I'm willing to go to 13. And now my employees can get 25. They're not stupid. I don't blame anybody who's doing that. You don't have a patriotic duty to go back to work for less than the government's going to pay you. You have no responsibility. I don't care what people say. Your job as an individual is to take care of yourself. And if you're smart enough to recognize that I'm getting paid $25 an hour by sitting home, but I'm only getting 12 going to work, I'm going to sit home. Why not? I don't have to deal with COVID. I can play with my kids. I can do whatever I want. I can make all the money I want. Why would I want to do that? I can make twice what I'm making working. It's crazy. So I don't have to have the second job. And I don't have to work for those hours. And that's exactly what's happening. And that's why the numbers are confusing. But when you break it down, they're not confusing at all. We have two people in every market, the sellers and the buyers. But what's happened in the labor market is we now have two sellers. We have private business, which is trying to sell at fair market value, and we have government, which is selling at way, way, way more than fair market value. Now, the government is going to win, right? Because the consumer, they look at both choices. They say, I got two choices. One pays twice what the other pays. I'm taking the one that pays twice what the other one pays. I'm going to take that job. And that's exactly what's happening. There's no confusion at all. The fact that we have millions of jobs available and millions of people unavailable is telling you right away something's messed up, because that never happens for any length of time in a free market system. The only way that happens is with government control, a government-controlled system. And that's the problem with government control, is they don't realize sometimes the stupid things that they do that will result in the stupid results that they get. And then they look at each other, can't figure it out, need to find some way to support it so they can keep doing it. So they go out and pay some economist who will support their theory. But the bottom line, I can tell you the bottom line right here, our labor market is messed up because government's involved. And it will continue to stay messed up as long as government stays involved. So, to recap, we have inflation. You as the consumer are seeing it. You're taking advantage of it. Congratulations. We'll talk about it a little bit more coming up in the rest of this month. But thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions every Wednesday, 9 to 10 o'clock, right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We are Martin County's Heritage Station.